The text message came through while I was reviewing case files at my desk, the casual tone somehow making the betrayal worse. Marcus had sent it like he was doing me a favor, like decluttering my apartment was an act of brotherly kindness rather than theft. Sold your guitars for rent money. Got $3,500 total from the pawn shop on 5th Street. We'll pay you back eventually, but you know how tight things are right now. You had way too many anyway. Nobody needs 6 guitars just sitting around collecting dust. I stared at the message for a long moment, processing both the violation and the complete misunderstanding of what he'd just done. Those weren't just guitars sitting around my apartment. They were evidence in an ongoing federal investigation, protected assets that had been placed in my custody as part of a major organized crime case I'd been working for the past 18 months. My phone rang almost immediately. Mom's number. Emma, I heard Marcus had to sell some of your things, she said without preamble, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to defend one child at the expense of another. I know you're probably upset, but you have to understand how desperate he is right now. The eviction notice came yesterday and he's got nowhere else to turn. He stole my property and sold it, I said quietly, keeping my voice level. He borrowed some guitars that you weren't even using, she corrected. And it's not stealing when it's family. You know Marcus is going through a rough patch with the divorce and losing his job. The least you can do is help your brother when he's struggling. I listened to her explanation of Marcus's financial situation, the same story I'd been hearing for the past 6 months. The divorce had been expensive, his sales job had been eliminated during company restructuring, and he was 3 months behind on rent with no prospects for immediate employment. Besides, Mom continued, you have too many hobbies anyway. All those guitars and music equipment just sitting around your apartment like some kind of storage unit. At least now they're helping family instead of gathering dust. I understand, I replied, my standard response when family members made decisions about my life without consulting me. Marcus feels terrible about it, but what choice did he have? You never play them when we visit, and it's not like you're some kind of professional musician. He needed the money more than you needed 6 guitars cluttering up your space. After hanging up, I sat quietly for a few minutes, considering my options. The guitars weren't just personal property. They were evidence in a federal case involving a sophisticated art and antiquities smuggling ring that had been operating through high-end music stores across 3 states. The investigation had taken 2 years to develop, and those specific instruments contained hidden compartments that had been used to transport stolen artifacts worth millions of dollars. My official title was Financial Crimes Analyst with the FBI's Art Crime Team, though my family believed I worked as a data entry clerk for a small accounting firm. The misconception had started accidentally when I'd mentioned working with numbers and financial records, and I'd never bothered to correct their assumptions about my career. The Art Crime Team was a specialized unit that investigated cultural property crimes, art theft, and antiquities trafficking. My role involved analyzing financial transactions, tracking money flows, and identifying patterns in the illegal art market. It was detailed work that required security clearance and extensive background checks. Not exactly the kind of job my family associated with their perception of me as the underachieving sibling. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one with natural charisma and sales skills who could charm his way into any job. Even now, unemployed and facing eviction, the family rallied around him with support and excuses. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one who kept to herself, worked with computers, and apparently collected too many guitars for no apparent reason. What they didn't understand was that those guitars weren't mine to sell. They were evidence in United States versus Richardson, a case involving a network of dealers who had been smuggling stolen pre-Columbian artifacts inside vintage musical instruments. The guitars had been seized from various locations and were being held as evidence while we built our case against the smuggling ring. As the lead financial analyst on the case, I had been granted temporary custody of certain evidence items for detailed examination and analysis. The guitars contained sophisticated hidden compartments that we were studying to understand the full scope of the smuggling operation. Each instrument was tagged, catalogued, and legally protected under federal evidence protocols. Marcus had essentially stolen and sold federal evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation. My phone buzzed with another text from him. Pawn shop guy said they're probably worth more than what he paid, but he was doing me a solid by taking them all at once. Might be able to get a better price if you want to try somewhere else with the receipt. The casual tone suggested he had no idea what he'd actually done. To Marcus, they were just his sister's excessive guitar collection. To the federal government, they were protected evidence worth approximately $1.4 million in total, not for their value as musical instruments, but for their role in a major criminal investigation. I called my supervisor, Agent Sarah Rodriguez, to report the situation. "Someone sold your evidence guitars?" she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. "How is that even possible? They were in your secured custody. My brother had a key to my apartment for emergencies. He's facing eviction and thought he was helping himself to some unused guitars. This is a massive security breach. Those instruments are central to our case against the Richardson Network. We need them back immediately." "I know. I'm working on it." "Working on it? This isn't something you work on. This is something you fix today. The U.S. Attorney's Office is going to lose their minds when they find out evidence in a federal case was sold to a pawn shop by your brother." Agent Rodriguez was right to be concerned. The guitars contained not just hidden compartments, but also microscopic traces of clay and other materials that linked them to specific archaeological sites. Our forensics team had spent months documenting every detail, and losing them could compromise the entire case. "Which pawn shop?" she asked. "Fifth Street Pawn," according to his text. "I'm sending agents there now. Your brother is going to need a lawyer." The next few hours moved quickly. FBI agents arrived at Fifth Street Pawn with a federal warrant, only to discover that 2 of the guitars had already been resold to private collectors. The pawn shop owner, Jerry Kowalski, was cooperative but clearly panicked when he realized he'd unknowingly received stolen federal evidence. "The guy seemed legit," Jerry explained to the agents. "Had ID, said they were his sister's guitars, just needed quick cash. Happens all the time. People sell family stuff when they're desperate." The agents explained that the guitars weren't stolen in the traditional sense. They were evidence in a federal investigation, which made their sale a serious federal crime regardless of Marcus's intentions or family relationship to me. By late afternoon, Agent Rodriguez called with an update. "We recovered 4 of the 6 guitars from the pawn shop. 2 were sold this morning to collectors who are cooperating with the recovery. But your brother is in serious trouble, Chin. The U.S. Attorney wants to press charges for theft of federal evidence, obstruction of justice, and interfering with the federal investigation." "What kind of charges are we talking about?" "Federal felonies. Potentially 10 to 15 years if convicted on all counts. The value of the evidence and the impact on our investigation make this a major case." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Marcus had no idea what he'd stepped into, and the family was going to blame me for his legal troubles once the truth came out. "There might be options if he cooperates fully and if you're willing to vouch for his character," Rodriguez continued. "But this can't be swept under the rug. Evidence security is taken very seriously at the bureau level." That evening, Marcus called me directly. "Emma, I need to talk to you about something serious. Some FBI agents showed up at my apartment asking about guitars I sold. They said they were evidence in some kind of federal case. What the hell is going on?" His voice was shaking, the casual confidence from his morning text completely gone. "You sold federal evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation," I said simply. "What? How is that possible?" "They were just guitars in your apartment. They were evidence in my custody as part of my job." "Your job? You work at an accounting firm doing data entry." "No, Marcus. I'm a financial crimes analyst with the FBI's art crime team. Those guitars are evidence in a major smuggling case I've been working for 18 months. Silence stretched for nearly a minute. "You work for the FBI?" he finally asked. "Art crime team, financial analysis division." The guitars contained hidden compartments used to smuggle stolen artifacts. They're worth $1.4 million as evidence, and you selling them is a federal crime. "But I didn't know. You never told me you worked for the FBI. You never asked about my actual job. The family assumed I did data entry and I didn't bother correcting anyone." Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing the implications. "What happens now?" "You need a lawyer. Federal prosecutors are considering charges for theft of federal evidence, obstruction of justice, and interfering with the federal investigation. These are serious felonies." "How serious?" 10 to 15 years in federal prison, potentially. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Emma, you have to help me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that I didn't know what they were. You're my sister, you can't let them send me to prison for this. I can't make federal charges disappear, Marcus. You committed federal crimes. But I'm family. Doesn't that count for something? The conversation that followed was difficult. Marcus alternated between panic and anger, blaming me for not clearly labeling the guitars as evidence, for not telling the family about my real job, for not preventing him from making this mistake. It was everyone's fault except his own. 3 days later, the family held an emergency meeting at Mom and Dad's house. We need to discuss what's happening with Marcus, Dad announced grimly when everyone had gathered in the living room. This FBI situation is completely out of hand. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, looking like he hadn't slept since the agent's visit. Mom hovered nearby with tissues and reassuring touches, while Dad paced the room with barely contained anger. Emma, I need you to explain something to me, Dad said, stopping in front of my chair. How exactly did Marcus get in trouble for selling guitars? This whole story makes no sense. He sold federal evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation, I replied calmly. Evidence? They were guitars in your apartment. Personal property. They were evidence in my custody as part of my job with the FBI. Uncle Robert leaned forward in his chair. The FBI? You work for the FBI. Art Crime Team. I'm a financial crimes analyst specializing in cultural property crimes and antiquities trafficking. The room went silent as everyone processed this information. You work for the FBI, Mom repeated slowly, as if saying the words might make them make more sense. For the past 4 years. The guitars Marcus sold were evidence in a major smuggling case involving stolen artifacts worth millions of dollars. Dad sat down heavily. Why didn't you ever tell us you worked for the FBI? You all assumed I did data entry at an accounting firm. No one ever asked for details about my actual job responsibilities. Marcus looked up from his dejected posture. She's lying. This is some kind of story she made up to get me in trouble for selling her stupid guitars. I pulled out my FBI credentials and placed them on the coffee table. The federal badge and identification card clearly showed my name, photograph, and title with the Bureau. Dad picked up the credentials with shaking hands. Financial Crimes Analyst, Art Crime Team, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The guitars contained hidden compartments used to smuggle pre-Columbian artifacts, I explained. They're evidence in United States versus Richardson, a case involving a network of dealers operating across 3 states. Selling them is a federal crime regardless of Marcus's intentions. But he's family, Mom protested. Surely that makes a difference. You can explain that it was an innocent mistake. Federal evidence protocols don't have exceptions for family members. Marcus committed federal crimes when he sold those guitars. Uncle Robert was staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. How long have you been working these kinds of cases? 4 years with the Art Crime Team, 6 years total with the Bureau. I started in financial crimes before specializing in cultural property cases. The family meeting continued for another 2 hours, with everyone struggling to reconcile their perception of me as the underachieving sibling with the reality of my career in federal law enforcement. Dad asked detailed questions about my work, while Mom seemed unable to process that her quiet daughter had been investigating major criminal cases for years. Why keep it secret? Dad asked finally. I didn't keep it secret. I just never corrected your assumptions. You all decided I was unsuccessful based on my apartment, my car, my lifestyle. No one was interested in the details of my actual career. Marcus was becoming increasingly agitated as the conversation continued. This is all bullshit. Emma's trying to make herself look important while I'm facing federal prison. She could make this go away if she wanted to. No, Marcus. I can't make federal charges disappear. You committed serious crimes. They were just guitars. They were $1.4 million worth of federal evidence in a major criminal investigation. Agent Rodriguez called the next morning with an update on the case. The U.S. Attorney's Office is willing to consider a plea agreement, she reported. Full cooperation, restitution for investigation costs, and 5 years probation instead of prison time. But your brother has to admit guilt and provide complete testimony about his actions. What kind of restitution? Approximately $200,000 to cover the cost of recovering the evidence, re-authenticating the artifacts, and rebuilding the portions of our case that were compromised, plus court costs and administrative fees. I relayed this information to Marcus, who responded with a mixture of relief and outrage. $200,000? How am I supposed to pay that? I don't even have money for rent. It's better than 15 years in federal prison, I pointed out. Can't you help me with the money? You work for the FBI. You must make decent money. I'm not paying restitution for crimes you committed. But I'm your brother. And this is partly your fault for not telling me about your job. The conversation followed a familiar pattern, with Marcus alternating between self-pity and attempts to blame others for his situation. The possibility that he might face real consequences for his actions seemed incomprehensible to him. The family's reaction was similarly predictable. Dad thought the restitution amount was excessive, while Mom insisted there had to be some way to reduce the penalties for what she continued to describe as an innocent mistake. Maybe if Emma explained to her supervisors that Marcus is a good person who made an error in judgment, Mom suggested during another family call. The FBI doesn't reduce federal charges based on character references from family members, I explained patiently. But you have influence there. You could put in a good word for him. I have no influence over federal prosecution decisions. If anything, my connection to Marcus makes this case more complicated, not less. Over the following weeks, the family dynamics shifted as everyone adjusted to the new reality. Dad started asking questions about my work that showed genuine interest rather than dismissive assumptions. Mom struggled to understand how I'd hidden such a significant career for so long, while Uncle Robert seemed almost intimidated by the revelation. Marcus ultimately accepted the plea agreement, admitting guilt to federal charges in exchange for probation and restitution payments. The $200,000 fine would be paid through wage garnishment over 15 years, assuming he could maintain steady employment. The case resolution came 6 months later when the Richardson Network was convicted on multiple federal charges related to cultural property crimes. The evidence from the guitars had been crucial in establishing the scope of the smuggling operation and securing convictions against 12 defendants. Agent Rodriguez commended my professionalism throughout the investigation, despite the personal complications created by Marcus's actions. Not many agents could maintain objectivity when family members compromise their cases, she noted in my performance review. Your handling of the evidence security breach was exemplary. The family relationships continued to evolve gradually. Dad developed a genuine respect for my career achievements, often asking for details about cases I could discuss publicly. Mom remained somewhat bewildered by the disconnect between her perceptions and reality, but she stopped making assumptions about my financial situation or career prospects. Marcus served his probation successfully and eventually found steady employment, though our relationship remained strained. The restitution payments would continue for years, a constant reminder of the consequences of his actions. I still don't understand why you never told us about your real job, he said during one of our rare conversations. Because it didn't matter what you thought about my career. I didn't need your approval or recognition to be successful in federal law enforcement. But if I'd known, I never would have sold the guitars. If you'd asked before taking my property, you would have learned they weren't mine to sell. The most significant change was in how the family viewed success and achievement. No more assumptions based on lifestyle choices or visible wealth. No more lectures about career advancement from people who didn't understand the work involved. Most importantly, no more treating someone's property as available for family use without permission, regardless of apparent need or financial desperation. Federal law enforcement doesn't recognize family emergency exceptions, and $1.4 million worth of evidence isn't just guitars sitting around collecting dust. Some lessons come with permanent consequences, including federal felony convictions and 15 years of restitution payments.